Welcome to the We Are Takoma show. We're coming to you from Maryland University, where the Hispanic Heritage Celebration and Conference is taking place. It is about the Latino Diaspora and the Great Central American Migration, organized by the Prince George County councilmember Deni Taveras. So let's go in and talk to some of the panelists. Can you tell us how you got this whole idea of the Latino diaspora?
Well, I thought that it was something that was highly needed. I'm originally from New York, and with the coming of Dominicans into New York, we started to get an intellectualization of the population, and so we did a conference called Dominicans 2000 that brought out a lot of people, and we really wanted to get an activization of the community, bring consciousness to the community. And I wanted to bring something similar here because I thought that we really lacked among the Central American community. We are just not having those deep conversations that we really need to have about our history, about how we got here. And so in collaboration with my chief of staff, Dr. Sol Espinosa, we started having that conversation. Why don't we do it here and bring all these great minds together to really start presenting something that will educate the population and will generate the next generation about their own history and their own story and how they arrived here.
And what is who are the main target for this conference?
Well, the conference is Latino Diaspora, the Great Central American Migration. So we really want to talk about the story of Central Americans and how they arrived here into the United States. We have panels on storytelling and how do we pass that story from generation to generation. We are talking about immigrant experiences and life outcomes and what's happening as we arrive here. We're talking about immigrant services. We're talking about racial identity. We're talking about economic statuses and socioeconomic makeup. And we're going to talking about political empowerment, ultimately. And so it's a whole day full of panels, activization. How do we bridge the black and brown divide? With Camila Chavez from the Dolores Huerta Foundation. As you know, Dolores Huerta was the right-hand woman for Cesar Chavez. She's having a documentary, and we're going to be talking about that as well here. So we're going to be showing the harvest of the empire to show how foreign policy influences in Latin America, particularly Central America, has influenced the refugee exodus from Central American countries into the United States, and primarily the Washington, D.C. area. And we're going to be talking about political empowerment at the closure with all our political officials.
And what is your expectation at the end of the day? What are you hoping?
At the end of the day, I hope to activate a new generation of consciousness so we can activate politically. And we don't really need to start from zero. We can learn from the Mexican experience. We can learn from the Puerto Rican experience. We can learn from the Dominican experience. And we don't have to, the Central American community does not have to start from scratch.
What is the future looks like? What do you think of the Latino diaspora? What is on it?
I want a greater consciousness amongst the community so that they could take pride in their history and take pride in their stories and how they arrived here.
Are you going to continue doing this? What is the follow-up?
I would hope so. I hope to do this every year. If God willing gives me the money and the possibility to be able to do this, I would love to have this every year.
What have been some of the challenges putting this together?
Well, frankly, the money. I have to pay out of pocket for everything that's happened today. I got one sponsor for $1,000, but this takes tens of thousands of dollars to achieve. We really need the support of the community, and hopefully with this, we can start getting the word out for it's. With all due respect, it has to be more than just festivals and parties We've got to educate our population about our stories. We can continue that conversation for many more years to come.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Councilmember.
you. Thank you so much.
With the situation going on with the immigrants, what is Maryland doing? What is the government of Maryland doing for the Hispanics?
One of the things that we've tried to do this past year, we introduced a Trust Act that was actually the lead sponsor on that bill. And what we're really trying to do, a lot of these immigration laws are federal issues. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is ensure that at the state level, we're limiting the participation of state agencies in some of these crackdowns. For example, we want to make sure that the police aren't asking people their immigration status when they pull them over. We want to make sure that our correctional facilities aren't unconstitutionally holding people past their sentence dates because there's some sort of administrative detainer out on them. We want to make sure that we don't have a Muslim registry created out of information that we have here in Maryland. So it's really defining sort of the constitutional boundaries and rights. And really, I think the fight for us is making it clear that in Maryland, it doesn't matter if you're an immigrant. It doesn't matter if you're documented or undocumented. The Constitution applies to everyone.
What can we do as Hispanics to better the situation?
It's a couple things. One is we've got to be vocal, right? We've got to come out and participate civically, be engaged. Voting numbers are still very low, voter turnout, right? We have a lot of people that are citizens who aren't even registered to vote, and the ones that are registered to vote don't show up on election day. And until we start turning the tide on that, that's when people start paying attention, when elections actually have consequences, right? If we can start swinging congressional races, governor races, all of a sudden it changes the dynamic because we have people who say, I'm in office because of this group and I want to keep them happy, right? And then we have a stronger voice. So I think that's number one. But number two, even if you can't vote, it's being civically engaged. It's showing up when we have different municipalities that pass different laws and statutes or ordinances that they want to put in, right? If you want to become a sanctuary city or whatever it is, having people show up and voice their opinion and let people know that they live in these communities and they want to be heard, even if they can't vote. It's really about just showing up.
What do you think are the nonprofits? We have a lot of nonprofits that deal with a lot with the Hispanics. What are they doing to create this conscience?
Yeah, so actually we work closely with a couple of these groups, right? Unfortunately, I think the biggest problem that we run into these communities is because of the fear, because of the fact that a lot of people are living in the shadows, these nonprofits end up getting stuck in a situation where they're still providing basic services, right? We're still worried about making sure that the schools are treating these kids equitably. We want to make sure people have access to health care. We're trying to make sure that folks are finding jobs. And so we have good nonprofits, right? We have CASA, we have the Latin American Youth Center. We've got a lot of good nonprofits that are working in the community. The problem is they end up getting bogged down in providing very essential services still. And so while we try to create the conversations, they're not moving at the pace that we want to because people are still very reticent and hesitant to come out to their local government and ask for help, ask for assistance. But nonetheless, I think it's important to note that they are making inroads. We're out campaigns, knocking on doors, getting people out to community meetings just to hear what it is that you guys need, what is it that you want, and then bridging the gap between these immigrant Latino communities and the standing communities that they're now entering into so that there isn't any discord when that transition happens.
What do you think is the future of the Hispanics or the immigrants here in the state of Maryland?
Well, I mean, I think we have a very good future, right? And what it really is about right now is whatever work we're doing is going to create the sort of platform that those next generations are going to come in. My parents immigrated here. I was born here. So for me, it's much different because now I'm coming at it as I feel like an American who happens to also have this Salvadoran culture, right? And so as we're going on and the kids that are in school now are having those same feelings, it's about creating that equitable path for them. I think the future's bright. I think we've got a lot of great kids. We just have to keep promoting them and telling them, you can do whatever you want. You can be the next governor. You can be a U.S. senator. You can be a doctor, a lawyer, whatever you want to be. at the highest level possible in that area. And so I think the future's bright. We've got a lot of great kids, and I think we're going to see a dramatic shift and change over the next 20, 30 years, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
What positive message would you give to the community?
Well, don't give up, right? Keep fighting, and also realize that the American dream is still alive and well. It seems like it's under attack, but nonetheless, like, as the son of 2 undocumented immigrants, I serve in the House of Delegates. It doesn't matter who your parents are. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what your first language is. Here in this country, if you work hard, you do the right thing, you stay out of trouble, you can achieve whatever you want.
How do you see the difference or the similitudes with the immigrants that came 40 years ago from the wars in El Salvador, for example?
Very similar, because it's people who come seeking hope and opportunities. People, they don't speak the language, they come people very poor. Very similar, you go back 100, 200 years ago, the same situation happened with the Italians, with the Germans, exactly the same situation. But little by little, they have been integrated into the society. So now, for instance, we see a lot of people have TPS, temporarily protected status. 20 years ago, I remember, because I met them, they used to be day laborers, undocumented day laborers. Very challenging situation. Now they have small businesses, they already bought the house. The little ones already are going to school and to the university. So from my viewpoint, it's a process. And that is the beauty of this great democracy. That is imperfect, absolutely, but give opportunities to people. And I think that we need to take advantage of that, because our community, little by little, is integrating in this society.
And you're talking that now the second generation now is in college, of the first immigrants. You in Casa, you are helping with legal issues to the community, but you're helping also with education. What other things are you doing with them?
Yeah, absolutely. The legal issues is very important, because the immigration issue, because people are very concerned and terrorized with this administration. But we also help in education, English classes. We help people to become U.S. citizens. You know that right here in Maryland, we have 200,000 immigrants and Latinos ready to become U.S. citizens. But the only issue is that they don't have the money, that is now very expensive, or sometimes they have some challenges with the language. So our responsibility is to make sure that we help our community to fully integrate, because when you are a U.S. citizen, you can vote and you have more benefits. So for us, it's very important. So that is another piece that we do. In addition to legal, we help people to become U.S. citizens. We provide English classes, computer classes, all of that kind of services. And for the new kids, the kids who are now the second generation, we're trying to improve the education, the public education system, working with, the Prince George Public School, Montgomery County Public School, to make sure there is opportunities for those kids, because they are our hope and our future.
They put the Latino image next to negative issues.
Right.
But what do you see the future? Are you optimistic? Are you positive? Or?
I do. I'm very optimistic. And let me tell you why. Because number one, we are resisting. We are part of the movement that are resisting. We are resisting through Know Your Rights, mobilization, civil disobedience, helping people to register to vote, people who qualify already, make sure that people know how they can come together. So for us, it's very important. That is very critical. But in addition to that, we believe that we can win. Because now that we are U.S. citizens, we have the responsibility not only to vote, but to be the voice of our families who are still undocumented. But also we have in 2018 and 2020 opportunities to win strongly. And that is the reason why we invite our community all the time to register to vote and to participate in this democracy. And I just want to be very clear, this is imperfect democracy. Our responsibility is to improve this democracy, is to make sure that this democracy is going to be for everybody, not for a small group of people.
I'm here with Eduardo Lopez, producer, director of Harvest of the Empire, and also of Línea Directa. Can you tell us a little bit about Harvest of the Empire?
Harvest of Empire is a documentary based on the great book by the journalist Juan Gonzalez. Juan Gonzalez is really the founder and co-host of Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman, in addition to being a wonderful columnist for the New York Daily News. The book and the movie really focuses on why Latinos are here in the United States. What were the causes that created the great waves of migration at different points in time from Latin America to the United States? And what we find when we look at history is that every one of the great waves of migration from Latin America were directly connected to very aggressive U.S. actions in Latin America, either for military or economic reasons. So, in other words, the migration from Latin America really is the unintended consequence of the long history of U.S. intervention in Latin America.
Now, what was the main objective of doing this documentary?
The reason that we produced and we worked on Harvest of Empire for 7 years before it came out at the end of 2012 was because this very important fact, that migration from Latin America is directly connected to actions the United States took in the region, that factor is never ever mentioned in any of the debates or reports or conversations that we hear at the national level about immigration. Every time you hear anything about immigration, it's almost assumed that Latino migrants just showed up for no reason at all, and nothing could be further from the truth.
How has this film impacted or have taught the American people?
Unfortunately, we were not able to get a national distributor for the film. So the impact has been limited, but I can tell you this, that in the audiences that have seen the film, which are many, for example, the film is available through YouTube and it's already up to around 60,000 views. In the audiences that have been able to see the film, we have seen that people's minds and hearts have been opened, because pretty much the most common comment that we received after people watched the film is, I had no idea of any of this history. I had no idea that the United States was even involved in Latin America or that any of this happened. So, for example, we look at the Dominican Republic. And so, on the one hand, the immigrants from the Dominican Republic will tell you, many of them, that their migration to the United States was caused by the invasion of the U.S. into the Dominican Republic in 1965. Yet American citizens, I would say the great majority, none of them know that the United States invaded the Dominican Republic in 1965 with 23,000 Marines. And so therefore, how can an American citizen who doesn't know that history understand why there are so many Dominicans in New York or in the United States? So if you don't know the history, then basically you really do not understand immigration, you don't understand immigrants, and you don't understand the whole situation that's happening in the United States today.
For example, can you tell us a little bit about the migration here of Central Americans, especially Salvadorians?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm from El Salvador, and I can tell you that the migration from El Salvador is maybe one of the most clear examples of how U.S. foreign policy affects migration. The census of 1980 said that across the nation there were fewer than 100,000 Salvadorans in the country. And yet today what we find is that there are more than 2 million Salvadorans in the United States. And for the past 3 years we have become the third largest Latino population in the country. In other words, in less than 40 years, El Salvador, which is the smallest country in all of the Americas, has become the third largest Latino population in the United States, passing Cuban Americans. How could that have happened? Well, what happened is that 1980 is the year that the Civil War exploded in El Salvador. And the way that the United States supported the very oppressive government that fought the war with torture and violence against civilians caused huge migration. So we see that in this area, which is very important to note, that the Washington metropolitan area is the only major urban center in the United States whose Latino community is majority Salvadoran. The reason that this population came is a direct result of U.S. foreign policy and the way that the Ronald Reagan administration fought that civil war during the 80s.
We're looking at this moment right now in time, we're looking at a lot of hatred toward the immigrants. But is that something new, or is that something that's been back in our backs?
Hatred against immigrants, and specifically Latino immigrants, unfortunately, is a hallmark of the way the United States has treated the subject of immigration. So back in the 1930s, during the Depression, there was a huge deportation of Latinos perpetrated by the Hoover administration. What you find is that more than 1 million Latinos were basically, forget about legal processes. They were just put into trains and shipped into the middle of Mexico. And estimates today are that some 60% of those people who were deported without any legal process during those times, during the Depression, were actually U.S. citizens. So we have seen this before. In the 50s, the Eisenhower administration had the very infamous Operation Wetback, which was very similar to the deportations before. So we have suffered this before. Whenever the United States faces difficult economic times, immigrants become scapegoats. But as you could imagine, really, if you really think about it, it makes no sense to think that an immigrant who comes from Latin America, who is working here as an undocumented person, how is that person responsible for the loss of jobs all over the United States? What power does that person have to affect U.S. economic policy? They don't. The reality is that immigrants are being used simply as scapegoats, because the reason people have lost jobs has a lot to do with corporations going to China, going to Mexico, or going to Vietnam. It has nothing to do with immigration. And so what we see today, unfortunately, is what we've seen in different times in the United States, that conservative politicians use immigration as a scapegoat to really escape their own responsibility for the situation in the United States today.
Eduardo, all this is in the movie Harvest of the Empire. How can people get hold of Harvest of the Empire right now?
Well, Harvest of Empire has been available for free on YouTube for, I would say, a year and a half or so. Okay. So you just go to YouTube, write Harvest of Empire, and there it'll be.
Well, thank you very much, Eduardo. And we're going to continue with the Latino Diaspora.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about the Pew Research Center?
The Pew Research Center is a nonpartisan, non-advocacy organization based in Washington. We're funded by the Pew Charitable Trust, and our purpose is to provide information to the U.S. public, to the world public, about trends, attitudes, and opinions of not only the Latino population in the U.S., but also other groups in the world.
When we come to the Hispanic community, you can give us a lot of information about the Hispanic community. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, the immigration coming into this country and where we are right now. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, the United States today has 45 million immigrants, but immigrants from Latin America make up about 40 to 45% of that 45 million immigrants. What's also interesting is the United States has more immigrants than any other country in the world, but Latin Americans are responsible for a huge part of that change. The U.S. used to not have the most immigrants. This is a recent change over the last 40 or 50 years. We have 12 million immigrants, for example, from Mexico alone. We also have about another 1 million or so from places like El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala. And when you take a look in total at Latin American immigration, it's been responsible for a lot of the immigration to the United States.
Now, when you investigate or you do the research, do you focus on something else? Like, for example, lately we have heard a lot about the rapists and the Mexican rapists, or that. Do you research on that?
No, it's actually very hard to get data on that. To get data on the characteristics, particularly the criminal backgrounds, for example, of any immigrants or any person, frankly, it's very hard to get that information. So while there may be instances of where an immigrant may have committed a crime, keep in mind that non-immigrants also commit crimes too. So this is not just about immigrants. Unfortunately, though, it's very difficult for us to get that data, and we don't have any reports on that.
What is the main purpose of your organization? What do you do with that information that you collect?
We make the information available to the general public. So everybody from students to professors to teachers to politicians to journalists like yourself are interested in our work and take our work and use our work as part of a report that they might do or an interview that they might do, like here today.
Does the government look at this information that you are collecting? Or?
The federal government plays no role in reviewing or examining our work. Our research work is done by us. We review it and we publish it. Of course, if the public finds our work interesting, they will take it and they will use it in various ways. If reporters find it interesting, they will use it in various ways. But to give you an example, we also estimate how many undocumented immigrants there are in the country, or unauthorized immigrants. So we estimate about 11.3 million people in the country today are in the United States without authorization. That doesn't come from the federal government. That is our estimate that we do in-house, and it's based off of data from Mexico, from the United States, various sources, but that comes from us.
And do you find out, for example, how many people within the Hispanic community vote?
Yes, we also track the Hispanic vote, and in 2016, it was quite interesting. There was a lot of discussion that Latinos would come out to vote in record numbers. They did. About 12.7 million voted. However, their voter turnout rate actually declined. Fewer than half of Hispanics who could have voted actually voted. So when you take a look at the Latino vote, record turnout, but that's largely because there were just more Latinos who could vote.
What can we expect from some of the studies, especially to help the immigration of the Hispanic community?
We provide a lot of great information about the profile and the geography of today's immigrants. So for example, when we're talking about the nation's Hispanic immigrant population, it's largely based in places like Miami, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C. In fact, the majority of Hispanics in the Washington, D.C. area are immigrants. And so our work really helps to characterize who are the nation's immigrants, where do Hispanic immigrants live, and how are they doing compared to U.S.-born Americans.
Can you tell us a little bit about the different demographic of the Hispanics? Because when we talk about Hispanics, you're talking about Colombianos, you're talking about Dominicans, Salvadorians.
Right.
For example, here, what is the majority of the demographic? What country?
So there's about 800,000 people in the Washington, D.C. metro area who say they are Hispanic. The single largest group, not a majority, but the single largest group are Salvadorans. They make up about 40% of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area's Hispanics. But here in D.C., we also have Bolivians. We have people from Guatemala, from Honduras. We have Mexican, Cuban, and Puerto Rican, but they're much smaller in numbers compared to other parts of the country. In fact, Washington, D.C. is so unique that no other part of the country has the kind of diversity among Hispanics that we have here. We have everything here. One group sort of larger, but not dominant. Whereas in Miami, it would be Cubans, Los Angeles, Mexicans, and New York, Puerto Ricans, and Dominicans. That's not the case here.
Mr. Lopez, thank you very much.
Yeah.
It was great having you here.
Thank you.
I hope it's not the last time, right?
I hope not.
All right, thank you. We're going to continue with the Latino Diaspora here in Maryland University.
The Dolores Huerta Foundation, we're based in California Central Valley in the agricultural rural communities of where all of the food comes from, all the fruits and vegetables that feed the country actually and the world. Many of it comes from where we live and work. And what we do is we work with farm workers, we work with immigrants, we work with everyday people who feel that they don't really have power or they don't understand maybe how systems work, the government works in the United States, and we train them and we say you can advocate for improvements in your communities, whether it's a new park, whether there are improvements to their schools, getting access to sewers, which one neighborhood had no access to sewers, and it was a very uncomfortable situation that they were living in. Whatever community members identify as things that they'd like to improve in their communities, and we act as their coaches and help them so that we train them to become their own advocates and they advocate for those changes. When it comes to our public education, we still have a long ways to go in the United States of America. And this is important to everyone, even if you don't have children in the school system, that we're talking about the future of our country and how people are being educated. In the Central Valley where we live and work, we have more prisons than universities. So when our schools are pushing out Latinos and African Americans, that's a very personal issue to us, and that's something that we need to address. So we are, and we're addressing that by working with local education coalitions as well as statewide coalitions. What are the laws? What are the system changes that we need to put into place to make sure that we're building more universities and less prisons? To those who want to get involved, we invite people to visit our website at doloreshuerta.org. I don't think you would find many people who say that they live in the perfect community and that there are no changes that they'd want to work on. We even know during election season, right, there are people from some states that will travel to other states just to go and educate those voters and all of that. And that's still an option too, right? Traveling to other places or working in communities that might need extra assistance.